guys, welcome back to another video, and this video is going to be my February 2021 reading wrap up. Now, I technically read 4 books in the month, although I DNF'd a whole bunch. I'm not going to be going into too much detail about those because I go into extensive detail in my 2 try-chapter tags, which is why I ended up with so many DNFs this month. So I will link those 2 videos down below if you want to hear about those. The only DNF that I will be talking about today is I Was Born for This by Alice Oseman. Now, I started this as part of a reading challenge that I started at the end of the month, and I just decided that it wasn't for me. I think that I never was really a part of the whole sort of boy band culture that I think that other people reading this would really identify with. So yeah, it just didn't seem like something that would really keep my interest, although I do recognise that it's a perfectly well written book, just not a me book. But the other 4 books that I read, I'm then going to talk about from lowest to highest rated, which isn't too hard given the fact that 3 of them I gave 4 stars and 1 of them I gave 4.5. So the first one that I gave 4 stars that I'll just go over quickly is Self-Care for Virgos. Now, this is again going to be part of that challenge I started at the end of the month that I'm still currently completing, and this is not the sort of book that I would normally go for. I'm not really into star sign stuff, but it's for that challenge, and I really enjoyed this. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars. As soon as it got over the sort of like energy and the universe and all that in the very first chapter, the actual self-care tips were incredibly useful, especially given the fact that because I identify with so many of the traits of the stereotypical Virgo, the self-care tips also seemed really reasonable and really interesting. I think that it made a really good point that self-care really needs to be catered to your own personality, and I think that I just really enjoyed it. I think that in a time like this, everyone could be using a little bit of self-care, and I'm trying to sort of implement some of the things that it suggested. That it's probably not going to be a permanent thing, but like, I really enjoyed it, and I think that if you find that you really align, your personality really aligns, I think that they've done one for each of the star signs, so I would say go for it. It was a lot of fun. The next book that I read, or the next book in my list of ratings, is Matilda, and this, I think, is a reread for me because I did read some of Roald Dahl's books growing up, but I can't remember which ones. I was talking about this with my dad, and he was saying that he seems to remember reading Matilda to me when I was younger, although he can't quite pinpoint which of Roald Dahl's books he did read. So I think I have read this when I was younger, but it was a thoroughly enjoyable experience. I really loved it. I now want to rewatch the movie. I think that Matilda as a character was far younger than I remember her being, but then again, they would have had to have aged her up to do the movie, and that's probably what stuck out in my mind more. And I think that it's just such a well-told story. I'd forgotten how good Roald Dahl's writing can be, and I think that there's a reason why it's a classic, and I think that it's so amazing, and yeah, I gave it 4 stars. So the next book was indeed a reread as well, and that was The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. I nearly said Mark Haddon, but that's the author of A Curious Incident of a Dog in the Nighttime. Anyway, I didn't think I would reread this book. I read it on audio, I think quite early last year, and I was like, yeah, it was fine, but not something I'm going to reread. And I ended up picking it back up again because me and a friend of mine had a pretty long car journey together for work, and it's a book that I have read and she is looking to read, so I decided to put it on while we were driving, and then I finished it up when I was at home, and I actually really enjoyed it a lot more the second time round. I think that it's a sort of like self-help fiction that is not preachy or like all about sending good vibes out into the universe and just, you know, hoping things will happen to you. It was incredibly practical and gave some really good examples, and I think that I really like the mindset of the book. And yeah, I just thought it was a really enjoyable read. I also really recommend the audiobook. My friend, when I was driving, pointed out that the narrator sounds a lot like Deadpool, and so it was just like Deadpool giving us life advice, which just made it so much more enjoyable, and I really loved it. So the final read for the month was Journals by Kurt Cobain. Now this quite literally is photocopies of journal entries and letters and notebook pages that Kurt Cobain wrote, and I think that I've heard that some people really don't like this because of the fact that it feels like an invasion of privacy of Kurt Cobain, but I think that he does make a mention of the fact that he pretty much expected the things that he has written to be read. I found this utterly fascinating. I would have to say that this is the best memoir I have ever read. Memoirs, I'm going to put this down because it's actually quite a heavy coffee table book, but memoirs don't tend to work for me, although there are some that I have enjoyed. Like, I really enjoyed Spectacles by Sue Perkins. I didn't really enjoy Boy Erased. I can't remember who that was by, but that one is also fantastic. But I tend to find the fact that memoirs don't really have any discerning plot, and the only, once you get to the end of the book, you just know that either their life carried on or they have since died, and it's pretty much, there's no suspense in the reading experience, so memoirs don't tend to work. But in this case, it wasn't someone trying to put words in Kurt Cobain's mouth. It wasn't someone else trying to spin the narrative of his life, and it wasn't him explaining his life in the way that he wanted to be portrayed or how he might have wanted to be remembered. It was almost as if you were handed a handful of puzzle pieces, and in the reading of it you kind of had to slot them in where you thought that they went, and you as the reader had to work out the aspects of his personality that were being shown through his journals, and it was just so raw and fascinating. And I think that something that I've definitely found is that the media portrayal of Nirvana and Kurt Cobain's life tends to be the sort of rock star lifestyle where, too much sex and drugs and metal and rock, and eventually fame driving him to suicide. I think that that's the only thing that ever gets really mentioned, other than the fantastic work that Nirvana put out. Nirvana is one of my favourite bands, hence why I read this. Hi guys, Editing Cora here, and no, I didn't notice the fact that I was wearing a Nirvana t-shirt the whole time. So yeah, back to the video. But I think that in reading it, you could see so many more aspects of his personality, and it wasn't until far later on that you could sort of see his mind starting to slip, or at least that's what I took away from it. It felt much more like, I would almost say it felt almost like what I expect from a Green Day song or vibe than I do from a Nirvana song or vibe. I think that it was really interesting. There was of course a lot of very foul language that we don't use anymore, but I think that he was such an interesting person for the views that he held, and there were so many things in there that I wanted to highlight, but I'm not into sort of marking up my books. But I think that it was a really, really fascinating read. It was originally my dad's, and he sort of flicked in and out of it, but I think I'm going to tell him to read it from like cover to cover, because I think that you sort of see the progression of his life. Some of the pages I just couldn't read because of the fact that writing was too messy. He tended to have days when he clearly sort of thought about what his handwriting looked like, and days when he really didn't. And I just thought it was really, really fascinating. So yeah, those are the 4 books and the many DNFs that I had this month, and I would love to hear something that, well, not this month, for February. I would love to hear about anything that you've read recently, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.